If you feel lost in your voice training, then this video is for you. We'll be covering the most common issues, mistakes, and questions to get you on the right track. The first most common question is also the most important. How do I know I'm actually practicing correctly? The answer is a two-parter. The first part of the answer is, in order to know you're actually practicing correctly, you need to isolate what we will refer to as your foundation. In this scenario, your foundation is everything that revolves around resonance that my first video explains how to control. Specifically your larynx, mouth space, breath, posture, and some throat muscles. And I know it might sound crazy at first, but you need to do so while not caring about how you sound. Now, of course, there'll be a time where you do care about how you sound, but to start, it's about isolating and mastering these individual components. You see, even if you were to raise your larynx properly, you still won't sound notably more feminine quite yet. That's because raising the larynx needs to work in unison with other elements to properly shape your voice. You're gonna want to know what these other three are, so let me break them down for you real quick. Vocal weight primarily refers to where your voice is resonating. A heavier sound will be in your chest, and a softer, lighter sound will be in your head. Mouth space is relatively self-explanatory, however, it's mostly modified by your tongue. Also, I talk about throat muscles in my first video, but not here because it's not relevant. Also, it's very complicated. Back to explain about how to know if you're training correctly. So, as ironic as it may sound, the way you'll know that you're practicing correctly when you're first starting out or when you're just honing in on resonance is you won't sound more feminine. You'll sound more like Stitch or Marvin the Martian.
What the hell are you talking about?
And ideally, you can imitate those voices because their entire voice is about utilizing resonance itself. To boil down what I'm saying, you need to master the muscles and techniques first, as opposed to spinning your tires and being miserable while trying to brute force everything all at once. Which brings us to the second part of the answer to how do I know if I'm practicing correctly? This is the part where we focus on sound. Ultimately, with muscles strengthened and experience isolating said muscles, we will tune our voices slowly towards a more feminine sound. Let's do an exercise to tune our voices together to give you a general understanding as to our goal here. Step one, we'll start with the hum technique, and buckle up because we're doing this one together. Alright, we're gonna start humming together. We'll feel it in our chest to begin with, then we're gonna move that sound into our head. This will lead to a brighter sound. As well, you'll feel the vibration literally in your head. Your goal is to maintain any changes in your throat and posture from when you move the hum into your head. Step 2, plug one ear to better hear how you sound and imitate this voice line. We seriously need more tea. Here's the key to know if you're practicing correctly in this exercise. Don't try to force yourself to sound more feminine. Use everything you've learned in my first video and begin to experiment with the ways resonance changes your voice while slowly trying to steer it into emulating my voice. When done correctly, you will hear a more feminine resonance from your larynx positioning, mouth space, and throat muscles alone. Meaning, you won't be trying to sound more feminine in the ways you've understood up until now, which is with pitch and falsetto. We seriously need more tea. Clench the base of your tongue gently and say, we seriously need more tea. Proper your posture when saying, we seriously need more tea. Speak softer when saying, we seriously need more tea. Try clenching your tongue gently again, not too hard, but enough to feel tension, and say, we seriously need more tea. Just as a reminder, clenching your tongue in this scenario refers to clenching the tongue that's literally leading into the back of your throat because that's a very good way to raise your larynx. Just to finalize this step, understand that you may need to redo the hum technique every now and then to reaffirm the tension in your throat and maintain that, or you may need to go back to the beginning and learn how to clench your tongue properly to raise your larynx, etc. Again, first video. Next big question is, how do I know what muscles to train? If you're completely lost after the last section or still not confident, then you likely are not sure what muscles need to be trained. The primary way to isolate these muscles is by doing exercises that indirectly utilize them. Generally speaking, when you're properly utilizing the correct muscles, your voice will effortlessly be more feminine. What this means is when you're speaking with a higher resonance, it won't actually feel like you're trying to sound more feminine. Like this exact sound coming out of my mouth right now, if I were to drop my resonance, would sound like this because I'm not modifying my vocal cords or pitch at all. It's simply all the muscles in my throat and my mouth. Next question, how do I know if I raise my larynx enough? First, if you gagged or can't breathe, you're raising your larynx too much. And if you're raising it the same amount that you would for a Stitch, then you're still raising it too much. Again, that was only to utilize and learn how to use the muscle. So take this approach. Even raising it a little is better than none at all or too much. Once you're used to raising your larynx, just try and raise it as much as you can without overexerting it, and then slowly lift shifted over time. Let's fire off some easier questions in rapid succession before we get into the last major question. What if my voice is too deep? 90% of trans women think their voice is too deep. 100% of the time, they are wrong. What makes your voice deep is resonance, which you have full control over. There are some trans women that have passable female voices whose masked voice is incredibly deep, like baritone deep. Will voice training make my voice permanently feminine? Yes and no. Basically, because of muscle memory, if you were to use your female voice 24/7, your voice would essentially default to that, and you might actually need to warm up in order to go back down into your mask range. So you'll never really lose your mask range. However, it might actually be difficult to get back into it if you use your female voice all the time. That said, the idea that your voice defaults to a feminine range is a very cool concept. The next question is, how do I fix an overly breathy or whisper-like voice? There's two angles to this question. The very obvious angle is to just project your voice more, apply more breath to your speech.
I'm about to eat nachos!
But the answer you likely need is if you try to apply more breath when you speak, however your voice drops, then it's likely that your muscles aren't strong enough to maintain that and you need to practice more. Over time, your muscles will begin to strengthen and be able to hold up when you speak louder. As well, that same logic applies for when you yell. Another question is, does singing help? And I would say no. Singing takes away from honing in on the essential practice of resonance and can lead people into over-reliance on pitch, which is the last thing you want. In other words, it's only really useful when you know how to utilize resonance and therefore have achieved your voice. Alright, the final question I'm addressing in this video is likely the most reassuring. How long does it take to fully transition your voice? By answering and breaking down this question, I'm actually going to make everything else make a lot more sense. Let me grab the graph. I'm doing this one in Microsoft Paint. Graph. So we're going to have two lines, one being red, that's going to be your muscle capabilities, aka your foundation. And the second line is going to be blue for technique, overall ability to modify sound. Bear with me for a second, I promise this is worth your time. So we got risk factor for overall sound, and on the bottom is going to be time. Let me type that in actually, one sec. Time spent. The P is staying capital, I'm too lazy. So red line is your muscle capabilities. You'll see that has a steady increase over time. However, technique, which is dependent on muscle capabilities, has an exponential increase. You'll notice both the blue and the red line have a sudden spike in them, represented by a control breakthrough, aka when you finally understand how to utilize these muscles. Everything before that we can categorize as the literal worst. If this still isn't 100% making sense, then here's an analogy to help. You know when you wake up, like you slept on your side and your arm's all wiggly, like you can't move it, your muscles are completely atrophied because there's no blood and you think your arm might actually fall off? Imagine that was your legs. That's like muscle atrophy in the legs means you can't use them. So you wouldn't be able to run, right? If you tried to run, you just plop on your face. That's kind of like here. If you're trying to use your muscles and sound more feminine, you're just gonna plop on your face. At first, while you're learning to use these muscles, then this is why you don't want to like force technique, because you do need to know these muscles in order to use technique. You'll see no increase in your sound, just an increase in self-hatred. You know what? Self-hatred is now represented by the purple line. Deal with it. Now let's pretend it took you 2 weeks to 2 months. I'm not gonna put the letters in because I'm lazy. To get at least some control of your muscles. At this point, you would see an increase in your sound quality. Now, 2 weeks to 2 months isn't necessarily that long, and you're already starting to see at least some feminine sound samples. At that point in time, you may only be able to say one word to one sentence. This is your 3rd month right there. Why not? Well, as you'll notice, after that, you have your exponential increase, and that is just, you're getting more and more feminine over time, quite quickly. And now it's a matter of being able to sustain that more feminine sound over the course of, minutes, hours, a whole day, depending on how much you use your voice. So the first threshold is the literal worst. After that, you have achieved a femme sound, but you cannot sustain it over time. After that, you're femme, speaking at length. Let's say you could talk for 15, maybe even an hour long, depending on how much you're utilizing your muscles. And everything after that is just honing the sound and the muscles over time. So I'll just have this like that. There we go. Now, you'll notice I use the word femme as opposed to passable voice, and that's because femme works on a spectrum. Like, you might sound more feminine to begin with, and then you might hit a passable point somewhere, even in the 3rd month if you're really good and just talented, or you might hit it here, or you might hit it here. It really depends, right? But the point is sounding more femme is still a win, and you should celebrate that. And one last thing I want to cover here, and I'll make another graph for this real quick. This one will be super fast, I promise. Let's pretend for a second that for the first 3 months you were training, then all of a sudden, for some reason, you just had to stop. Whatever the reason might be doesn't really matter. You stopped, but in the meantime, you were still using your muscles and honing those. You might realize that you actually lose some of your sound quality, but so long as you're honing your muscles during that time, when you do come back, your increase will still be exponential. And that's exactly why I call the muscle honing the foundation, because the more foundation you have, the easier and faster it is to build technique on top of that. So as long as you're not training, make sure you're still honing your muscles, and that way when you do go back and record your voice and put in the time for tutorials, it'll be so much easier to succeed. You may have noticed mid-video that my bedroom changed a bit. Why, you may ask? Well, of course, I had an energy high from today's sponsor, G-Subs.
I'm literally addicted and saving hundreds on energy drinks.
A huge sloppy thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube members. Okay, bye.